What is liberty? How do each of us define it? Freedom for everyone? Freedom for those we agree with? What's government's role in liberty? Should it be small, large to provide for the people? These are all the questions asked in my search for liberty. Guests from across the political spectrum join us to discuss these very questions. An investigation into the definition of liberty, how we achieve the ultimate liberty, and what is the government's role in protecting liberty.
Just liberty as in freedom to do what you want is really not what I believe in. I believe that the liberty from my vantage point is usually like the focus of that is personal responsibility. Because if you just do whatever you want without any consideration for the future or for those around you, you can really destroy not just yourself, but the world. But I do very much believe that the government ought to be limited in that it does not interfere as long as you are using your liberty not to injure someone else. So that to me is broadly speaking what it is. But if you don't pair that with a work ethic and personal responsibility, then you would probably prefer statism, to be honest. So I think that it's important that you convey both messages simultaneously.
My definition of liberty would be for us to be able to live our lives as we see fit without government interference, whether that's through regulation or overtaxation of our persons, our businesses.
But I was in a class once arguing with an econ professor, and I had never read a book. I had never really understood, incentives or anything, or really got into any politician. And a kid in my class, a classmate afterwards said, "Hey, you should really look at this guy, Ron Paul. I think you'd really like him." And so I went back to my dorm room and I Googled Ron Paul. This is in 2010. I had no idea he ran for president in 2007 for the 2008 race. Right. And I spent like 12 hours in my dorm room going down this vicious cycle of Ron Paul YouTube videos. And in the morning, I was just captivated by the guy, his Rudy Giuliani moment, his consistency of never voting for a tax increase, never voting for a budget that doesn't balance, never voting for new wars. I'd never seen somebody consistent like that in politics. So I wanted to learn more. But I poked my head out of my dorm room in the morning and I'm like, man, everybody must be watching these videos. Like this guy is, he's the revolutionary. And of course, I come to find out, no, nobody cares. Everybody's apathetic. And it was at that moment that I got introduced to liberty. And, I started to read books, right? I read Economics in One Lesson, The Road to Serfdom, The Law. And you start to really dive in. To me, liberty is about the idea that you don't want to hurt people and you don't want to take their stuff. I think Matt Kibbe in his book says it best. I think that is the simplest way to say it. But I think it's very difficult because there are so many terms in today's political world that are distorted. Liberty is one of the words that is not. And so a lot of times I don't say the words conservative or libertarian because I feel like people have a definition of them. And so that's why one of the terms I've coined is make liberty win, because I feel that we can still define it. I love that you're doing this documentary, asking people about it. But I do think it's one of those words that has not been stolen, and it gives an opportunity to talk about the idea of more freedom and less government.
I tend to define libertarianism in the sense of classical liberalism, and that libertarianism is a commitment to private property, the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, free markets, like natural rights, human rights. I think that all of these things are rolled into that category. And so when I think about liberty, it's just human beings given the ability to determine their own course for their life. And I believe that every single human being is an autonomous individual. They are independent. They have the ability to make their own decisions, and that the world is in a much better place and that society is much better off when people are given the ability to freely pursue their own ends.
It was very libertarian, still is very libertarian. I think, anybody who's around this long enough knows there's a big difference between what's called the big L libertarians, those who are part of the actual Libertarian Party,
right,
and then little L libertarians, those who just prescribe to the philosophy.
Right.
And I still call myself a libertarian, but I'm a libertarian in the real world.
And I think about the founding of the United States, and the idea behind it is in liberty and your freedom to worship how you like, freedom of speech and that kind of thing. But I don't exactly remember who said this, but there's a quote that says, no man is truly free who can't control himself. So that's a powerful quote to me, at least on an individual level, as far as me as just myself and liberty and freedom is, well, if I want to be truly free, thinking about like just even liberty financially or financial freedom or anything else, is that you have to have restraint. So that's one of the most principal things when it comes to liberty. It doesn't mean I can just go around treating people however I want to, nor even with freedom of speech should you go around saying whatever you want. I think it's important to have true liberty. It starts with a person having self-control, discipline, those kind of things, and just living your life freely. So
liberty to me is freedom, as in I have the freedom to choose my career. If I want to work for the man or start my own job, do I want to go to college? Do I want to send my kids to a private school? Do I want to grow my own food, or do I want to buy it for the grocery store? Mm-hmm. Having those options, do I want to save my money and take a big vacation? Do I want to just, take a little weekend trip right now? Where I want to travel, what I want to do, that to me is liberty. Waking up in the morning is like that American dream. What do I want to do today? What do I want to do this year? What do I want to do in the next 10 years? How do I want my family to be raised? Do I want to go to church? All of that. Liberty is the freedom for me to do whatever I wanted. Like if I want to live my life, as long as it affects me and I'm not out there affecting other people, that's liberty to me.
First, they need basic security. Which means that, if they express themselves, they should not be subject to arrest. They need freedom of speech as an absolute prerequisite to being free. We need kind of like our basic needs for food, clothing, and shelter to exist, or else we become wage slaves.
Yes. And I wanted to kind of just figure out, what did the ancients think? So I like how this documentary is about, what is liberty essentially? What are the different definitions of liberty? And what I've personally found was that, so liberalism, right, which comes from the Enlightenment period, one of the major three ideologies of Enlightenment period thought, the other two being nationalism and socialism, essentially, says that liberty is an independent individual maximizing his or her utility.
There's all sorts of different definitions. I like to give it context and put parameters on it. I could say maximizing individual freedom, which is true. What does that mean in real time? Well, I write about politics for a living, so that would mean if somebody nonviolent went to jail for a very long time because we have stupid mandatory minimum laws, getting them out quicker than they would have otherwise. It means maybe not starting another war, especially a needless, mindless, unwinnable war like most of the ones that we get involved in. It could mean drug legalization. It could be something like that happened, and this will be old news by the time this comes out, that Julian Assange is finally free. It's under less than ideal circumstances. I didn't expect Joe Biden to do it, but boy, when a man's desperate, I guess he'll do just about anything, and good for Julian Assange, who's a hero. So those are just a couple examples. Those are the things I like to focus on. And something of interest to me is not reminding libertarians that like these are cool things we want to happen, but to going out into the larger world as it involves politics and making those people care about this stuff too, or seeing why it matters, or playing a role in it happening, even if it's not something that they're really invested in.
Yeah, I think if you're not a disciplined person and you're just given full grace to do whatever you want with your life, you're probably not going to have a very good life. So I think that's the reason that America was so special, is that it was a bunch of rebellious people that wanted to be free, but they wanted to be free to do good. They wanted to be very moral people, and the vast majority of them had religious, affiliations and very, very significant work ethics, very tight communities. Like, these are all things that, unfortunately, I don't think are as pervasive in modern America. So I think that's why kind of a limited government libertarian framework worked well for them. And as we've gotten away from that, it's kind of a chicken the egg. As you get further away from a limited government, you also become a people who needs more government, because you are essentially either coddled or crippled by the size of the state.
So, if in your view of liberty, what is the role of government? Do you think how should it be limited? How should it be approached from our perspective? Where, how are we going to interact with government and still have freedom?
I've been across the spectrum on this. I feel like when I first started to get in, I was, very much an anarchist. And what I mean by that is not the current definition. I don't mean the, folks in masks rioting on campus, but this idea that, no government was the ultimate end. And I probably still believe some of that. But the reality is I'm 33 years old now. And I feel like over the last 15 years, since I've been awakened to the ideological world of politics, my views have changed in that you have to understand where you are. And so the way I look at it is, in any situation, when we're talking about lawmakers, or we're talking about the executive or the courts, I always want to be moving toward liberty. And what I mean by that is I want to be moving toward less government and the protection of individual rights. So for me, it can be nuanced. And I think that some people try to make it black and white, which they should in certain situations. But that's how I analyze any type of vote or any type of decision is, are we moving towards more government or less government? Now, I think that COVID and a lot of the stuff happening in schools creates a little bit of an outlier, because there does become a role, there really does become a role at certain points for government to step in. And what I mean by that is, you saw DeSantis doing a lot of things where, he pretty much would step into private business affairs, but say you can't fire somebody based on a vax mandate. And, me 10 years ago, I would have said he shouldn't be getting involved. But the reality is where we are is we already have a government that is involved in private business when it comes to anti-discrimination laws and all these other things. So why not step up to provide medical freedom to certain people? When they're chopping off the penises of young boys and the breasts of young girls, 10 years ago, I might have said, well, it's between the doctor. And it's like, no, I think as a society, we have laws in place to protect children until they're 18 to make their own decisions. And so I feel as if, I don't want to say I'm not consistent, but I think that every situation we need to look at and decide, are we moving toward more government or less government? And I always want to be heading toward less government.
On the federal level, I think government should be limited to a strong military defense, securing our borders, and that's basically about it. When government gets overly involved, they just screw things up. I think government should be limited in all facets. Government is really good at regulating us and telling us what we can't do, instead of just trusting the free market and trusting us to just live our lives and thrive in a way that we see fit.
I really love John Locke's conception of natural rights, the idea that we all have a right to life, liberty, and property that is granted to us by God, and that those cannot be taken away. And so insofar that we have to have a human government or human governance of some kind, the only purpose of human government would be to protect those natural rights. And I feel like that resonates with me philosophically and just empirically as I look around the world. That seems to be the only moral way of structuring society.
Is this there's people involved with liberty that are like, they're living in just like a world that doesn't exist. For an example, we have a school choice amendment fight going on right now here in Kentucky. And, you'll see the libertarian, big L libertarian, by that I mean the anarcho-capitalist, because once again, anybody who joins the Libertarian Party or takes part in it for any length of time knows right away that party has no idea what it stands for. It's just a weird mixed mash of people disenfranchised with the Democrat Party, people disenfranchised with the Republican Party. And so they kind of come together and they create this, they say they share the same philosophy, but when you look at the policy and principles and what they actually want government to do or not to do, there's not, and like literally, there's not an agreement on a policy in that party. I mean, you know, sure, the platform says they have this stance on abortion, but you go down to the state level, some of the states are like, we don't even talk about it. Ask the candidate. The candidates can be pro-life and still be libertarian. I mean, it's just, you know, that's a very big issue. There's no policy on that.
I mean, I've gone back and forth on this because I do consider myself an anarcho-capitalist, but at the same time, I think in terms of being a pragmatic human being, I am not opposed to having a very, very small government that is responsible for national defense. That is the extent to which I would be willing to grant the state power. And honestly, I'm not at all convinced that it's necessary. I just think in terms of reality, we're not going to get away from that framework. But I think that my driving force is that I would like to have as much power brought down to the individual, but less than that, I would prefer that it be left to the states. So I very much believe in the federalist model and allowing for kind of 50 states of innovation and experimentation. And I think that allowing for people to move to states that are more in line with their values, I think was a brilliant framework for the nation, and one that could work well if we would embrace it again.
Yeah. So most of the work that I do is based on this question and based on the notion that I believe the states are everything. I think during COVID, we learned that the states that had some courage and had backbone pushed back against the craziness of the federal government overreach. I think, look, I'll take you back 2017. I really started to try to pitch people on this idea that we need to focus all of our time and energy building a bench of Ron Pauls across the country. People that understood the role of government. Let's get them into the state house, state senate. They'll work their way up, but we need to build a bench similar to what the left did. The progressives have done this for the last 30 years, is you got to have a minor leagues. And so I kept trying to pitch folks and activists to get excited. It's tough to get excited because you turn on the news and everybody's talking about Congress, they're talking about the Supreme Court, they're talking about the White House. Nobody's talking about the Kentucky State House, where most of your liberties are being stripped away every day. And that's the real battle. And for the first couple of years, it was a tough sell. People were not excited, but 2020 changed all of that because of COVID, like I mentioned, where states were fighting back and people said, wow, thank God I live in a state that has some, values and will push back on the nonsense. And the second thing was the election, right? Regardless of what people think about the results of the 2020 election, millions of Americans woke up to this idea that the electors are chosen by the states. The states are the ones that can push back. The state legislature approves the electors that get sent to Congress, right? And so all of a sudden, 2020, it was good timing for me that I kind of had this jolt from just natural occurrences. But now a lot of people realize that states are the battle. I think, to answer your question directly, I think the federal government is completely run amok. I don't want to say that we shouldn't put any effort towards saving it. But when you're $35 trillion in debt, the jokers in D.C. have no intent of actually fixing the problem. The Democrats come out and scream that we need more money for domestic welfare. The Republican establishment comes out and screams we need more money for warfare and for the military-industrial complex. They yell at each other on cameras. They go into a back room. They laugh it off. They shake hands. And guess what? We spend money on both. More money to the tune of trillions of dollars for all the things that these folks want. And what is it doing? It's crushing our dollar, causing inflation. The Fed just keeps printing it, or we're borrowing it from China. And all of a sudden you have a situation where our dollar is worth less. And it's crushing the middle class in this country. So to me, when I look at the federal government, I only want people like Massey's and Rand Paul's and folks that will go up there like a Ron Paul to say no, right? We need that type of courage. We don't have it right now. I could count on one hand, maybe two hands, the amount of people that are willing to do what's needed to be done. But that's not going to lead to them being liked. It's not going to lead to them getting reelected. And right. Politicians, we teach this. They only care about three things: getting elected, getting reelected, and getting elected to higher office. And when I say that, people make fun of me, but it's the truth. Every decision is based on that. So to me, if you're out there, if you're an activist, even just an informed voter who wants to make a difference, the states are the battle. We need to create states. We call them liberty states. We need to create liberty states that are getting rid of income tax, pretty much abolishing the property tax, advancing liberty, defending life, doing things in a state that are going to attract people, attract businesses, and increase the quality of life. I'm not rooting for a national divorce, but I do think inevitably at a certain point, when California comes to the feds and says, hey, we need you to bail us out for the tune of $30 billion, I don't know if the good old boys in Kentucky are going to.
Yeah, you had to get signatures for all your other people, but you can just get onto but even if you do have to get signatures because remember, even Republican and Democrat presidential candidates have to get 5,000 signatures in Kentucky. It doesn't matter what party you belong to. You have to get the same amount of signatures to get presidential ballot access. But even if you don't get access and you have to get signatures to get access to the general election, I'd rather have to get 1,000, 5,000 even signatures on a ballot than have to run a state Senate election like I did, where I have to raise $150,000, knock thousands of doors, go to not thousands, but go to, tons of events, speaking things, debates, knocking doors, calling up, literally placing thousands of phone calls, asking people for money. Like, I would rather do that or go get signatures from people in a district than have to go through the primary process for a Republican or Democrat primary to go ahead and get ballot access into November. But so the point is that I hear them lamenting about the rules or it's the same for everybody. Arguably, the Republicans and Democrats go through harder effort. The difference is that the Republicans and the Democrats have a platform that comes with policies they're supposed to represent. I'm not saying they do. I agree with all the Republican Party platform. And so I have no problem being a Republican because I agree with the platform. Now, I disagreed and I didn't like the politicians. That's why I left the Republican Party and tried the Libertarian Party for a bit there. But the problem is that the Libertarian Party, not only does it have all the same issues, because I realize that, holding people accountable to their political promises just takes people. It doesn't matter whether you have an L, a D, an R next to your name. If people aren't holding you accountable, it's going to result in the same thing. A new party isn't, the Republican and Democratic parties are not broke because they're the Democrat and Republican parties. They're broke because they're made up of people.
Schools to inject this social theology, which I feel like it's become a religion, into our kids. That's something that needs to happen at home, whether it's from a liberal perspective or a conservative perspective.
I'm a Jeffersonian. I'm a minarchist, really, if you wanted to break it down. A lot of my anarchist friends would be like, that's lame. And I think this is pretty much what Jefferson believed, that the moment that we didn't have any government, 2 or 3 people would get together and it would look something like government. So the idea is to keep it as small as possible, realizing it will be inevitable. Now, what we have right now is nowhere within in the United States, it's constitutional parameters, which are supposed to be, the borders of what the government can do and can't do. But I'm still glad the Constitution's there and we can point to it and be like, you can't do this. I know you've been doing it for a while, but that don't make it right. Just because you beat your wife for 30 years doesn't make it mean it's okay. You need to stop doing that. So I think that's how we look at the Constitution. Maybe that's a terrible analogy, but yeah.
I usually just break it down to peace and property rights. That it's really about not aggressing upon your neighbor. So essentially just trying to be a good, respectful person that would not interfere with someone if they're not interfering with you. But then property rights being kind of the foundational principle that has to be kind of mutually agreed upon, lest society evolve into chaos. So I think that's, and then non-intervention. So those are kind of like the primary. But yeah, personal responsibility, personal self-defense. You have to be able to basically defend yourself if you're not going to have a significant government. You have to be able to defend your property, and you also have to have kind of a legal framework by which you can do so without running afoul of the state.
Yeah, and even look at Louisiana. They're voting to put the 10 Commandments in every school, and there's outrage. And I've had to sit back and think, what would my position be on that? I'm a Christian. But at the end of the day, should we have a separation? And it's like, I support Louisiana doing that. Why? Because the states have the right to do something like that. You don't like it? Go to a different state. You represent a different religion? Build up in a different state and pass those types of laws. I mean, it's not an issue I'm going to be all in for, right? I'm not going out there saying we need this in every state,
Right.
but that's the conflict you're seeing where people are fed up. It's the pushback, right? It's the
Yep.
retaliation to some of these things and some of the woke stuff where some of these states are saying, listen, the hell with that. This is what we believe. We're not going to hide from it anymore. You're drowning our kids in this LGBTQ garbage and demanding that they, go to these drag shows. And it's a way for people to express themselves and push back. And I think more states are going to do that on certain issues as they get fed up with the feds doing nothing.
Liberty means being free to choose how you want to live your life. As long as you don't hurt anyone, take their stuff, damage their property, or force your beliefs on others. What is government's role in liberty? Can you have freedom with big government? Socialism uses the force of government to take from one group to give to another. If any one of us took from someone to give to another, even if our intentions were good, we would consider this theft and we would be prosecuted for that crime. But when government does it, it's the law. We can look to the Constitution to guide us in the role government should serve. So with freedom comes responsibility. How do we achieve more liberty? As Milton Friedman said, if you would put equality before freedom, you get neither. But if you put freedom before equality, you get a great deal of both.
I know. I mean, that I think that is the origin story for a huge percentage of libertarians is recognizing that the central bank is essentially has a monopoly on the creation of currency or of money. And with that comes tremendous peril and destruction of personal liberty and wealth and everything else, property rights. So it's like that. I think that is how most libertarians I know came to be libertarians, is once they realized what the central bank was doing and how they get away with it and how no one cares or talks about it. And it's just kind of this given that, if you're going to have, 3 to 10% of your wealth extracted from you annually on top of the taxes that you pay to the federal government and the state government and the local municipality and the sales tax and everything else, it's like, oh yeah, half of your life is spent laboring away for a state that doesn't provide you a whole heck of a lot. And I think
we don't get a lot of
realize
bang
that,
for our buck. Yeah.
Yeah, I think once you realize that, it's very tough to come back to Normieville. You're like, wow, this is a very unjust system. And then once you understand, time preference and what it does to a population of people, once you realize that, like, oh, if I'm losing 5 to 10% of my wealth annually, well, then that incentivizes me to spend everything that I take in much more rapidly. Or if you're a very good investor, you might be able to outpace that inflation. But on a broad level, it just incentivizes an entire population of people to have a very high time preference, that they start to buy things that they probably don't need. It really deteriorates all of like the foundational framework that's necessary to create a viable long-term civilization, which is one that is constantly reinvesting their wealth and creating jobs and innovating and delaying gratification. Like, these are things that create a very positive society that grows and prospers. And if you have the opposite dynamic, then you get the opposite outcome.
But I really do believe that Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, and Murray Rothbard are probably the three greatest classical libertarian philosophers. But I think all of them kind of occupy a different niche within that world. Like, I look at Ludwig von Mises as just a pure economist, and his economic analysis is so beautiful and brilliant. I think that Friedrich Hayek and Murray Rothbard are a bit more philosophical in their take, and they deal with more philosophical issues. Not that Ludwig von Mises doesn't, but with Friedrich Hayek, you look at like The Road to Serfdom, you look at The Counter-Revolution of Science. He has another collection of works that he edited called Capitalism and Historians, and in a lot of Friedrich Hayek's work, he tries to just break down like the social and political philosophical underpinnings of our current system. And I think he does such a great job of addressing those problems from a philosophical angle. Great economist too, but I look at him more as a philosopher, and I view Murray Rothbard in a lot of the same light, that he was an excellent political commentator and a great philosopher, obviously an excellent historian and a good economist as well. But I kind of see all three of them as occupying a different space. And if you really want to understand the libertarian tradition, you have to engage with all three of their works.
I have to say my viewpoint was was very libertarian, still is very libertarian. I think, anybody who's around this long enough knows there's a big difference between what's called the big L libertarians, those who are part of the actual Libertarian Party,
Right.
and then little L libertarians, those who just prescribe to the philosophy.
Right.
And I still call myself a libertarian, but I'm a libertarian in the real world. There's people involved with liberty that are like, they're living in just like a world that doesn't exist. For an example, we have a school choice amendment fight going on right now here in Kentucky. And, you'll see the libertarian, big L libertarian, by that I mean the anarcho-capitalist, because once again, anybody who joins the Libertarian Party or takes part in it for any length of time knows right away that party has no idea what it stands for. It's just a weird mixed mash of, people disenfranchised with the Democrat Party, people disenfranchised with the Republican Party, saying the difference between the like anarcho-capitalist types that and where I'm at. And I'm kind of an anarcho-capitalist that lives in the real world, saying, well, geez, government shouldn't fund education at all. It should be up to the parents and everything else. And like, in a large part, I agree with you. Like, yeah, it probably should be up to the parents. I mean, full disclosure, my son goes to private school and I pay for it all myself, and I know not everybody has those means, but whether that's homeschooling your kids or what have you, you would think largely that should fall onto the parent. And the fact that we've turned to government to provide such a huge service, putting that in quotations, such a huge thing that really shapes how our children view the world, shapes their values, shapes a lot of their belief system, how they think. And we've handed that off to the government to do. And I think that creates a lot of big issues. So yeah, I'm with you. Really, government should get out of the business of being involved at all in K through 12 education, because it's so corruptible, because it's touchable by government. However, in the state of Kentucky, we have a constitution that mandates our state government fund K through 12 education. We have to do it. We do not have a choice.
It's a great question. I think it's one of the biggest charades in politics, which is, if you go right now and listen to every Republican running for Congress on the stump, they all sound like a hardcore conservative. Last night I was at an event and I heard this congressman talking and the whole table was eating it up. And I pulled out his congressional conservative scorecard, and he was at like 81%. And it's like, he can talk about being America first, but the scumbag sending trillions of dollars overseas, or maybe not trillions, but, billions of dollars to Ukraine, while we're struggling here for the middle class to make ends meet. So I think if somebody's really looking to do a little bit of research, I think looking up scorecards for incumbents is important. I think the biggest question you can ask a non-incumbent is, if they get elected, whose voting record will they most closely match? And to me, that's important, because I think a lot of times there are certain people we know and trust, like in Kentucky. If I'm talking to somebody running for state house, like a TJ Roberts, and he tells me that he's going to vote with Savannah Maddox, well, that's a huge, huge plus, right? If he tells me he's going to vote with one of the, establishment shills, that's a problem. And another thing is, if they don't know, that's an even bigger red flag, right? Like if you're going into this thing and you don't know who you're going to ally with, it's going to be tough and the establishment's always there, just chomping at the bits to lock these people in. And so I just always say that, ask them, if you know the body they're getting elected to, ask them who they will vote the most with, and hold them accountable to that. If somebody's running for Congress, they say, I'm going to vote with Massey or the Freedom Caucus. And then on every major vote, they're on the opposite side, expose them for that. But for incumbents, I'd say look at their votes if you have the time to do it. And for non-incumbents, ask them who they will link up with, who they will stand by on all the tough votes, who best represents their ideology.
I would like to see the states have more power, and that's how it was originally intended. The government closest to you should be the most powerful one within the states. I would love look, I don't want any of the governments to be powerful, but we're talking about degree of power and proximity to person. That's how it should be. That's federalism. There's way too much power concentrated in Washington. We go to war. They could say, well, the Ukraine fighters, we're fighting with them. We're fighting for democracy. Well, first of all, Ukraine's not democratic. They'll throw you in jail for saying the wrong thing. Worse than that, let's be honest. You want Raytheon and Boeing and all these defense contractors to keep the money coming in. So you got to rationalize some excuse. because you can always get enough partisans to sort of support this stuff. But at the end of the day, that's what it's really about. Hell, we were just talking about Julian Assange. I think he said years ago, like the reason we have these wars and they're endless is that's the point. We don't get caught in this and like, oh, what have we done? That was the point from the beginning.
Right.
We will be an Afghan. Something Biden did and did it poorly. He should have did it the way Donald Trump had planned it, was he got the hell out of Afghanistan. I'm glad he did it. I'm surprised he did it. But the people who were mad about it wanted us to be there another 20 years, 50, 70, could be the new Korea for all they cared. But it makes them a lot of money.
Background is that most libertarians I know that are focused on the inflation aspects and the finance aspects and the central banking aspects of libertarianism come from a conservative worldview, because for whatever reason the left struggles to understand the central banking and the finance aspects of things. So that's what.
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to look at certain issues. Look, when I got involved, I was encouraged by the debt, right? And I was encouraged by the Fed, and I was encouraged by the wars. When I say encouraged, I mean I got involved to stop a lot of the nonsense, right? But at the end of the day, you have to go where the energy is. And you have to have a position, and you have to be firm on your position. I don't think that men should be in girls' bathrooms, and I think that we should be pretty firm about that. Did I get involved in politics to stop that? No, but it's an issue that's developed. And the society is going so insane and woke, and we have to stand by those that are, pushed aside or cast aside by society, that people have lost their minds. And so I think a lot of these culture war things, are a result of people being fed up and they're tired. So yeah, I do think we should play in them. I don't think we need to, throw out the softballs just because, we think we need to. But I think on certain things, there is a great liberty position to take. I think somebody like a Chase Oliver at the Libertarian Party is on the opposite side of every major issue that matters to the American blue-collar worker. And I think liberty, people say liberty populism. I don't necessarily know, how you define that. But I think Ron Paul, I'll share a story with you. I had Nigel Farage speak at an event for me in 2018, I believe. And I think this was right after Brexit. It might have been 2019. And he said to me, he said, Cliff, you know how I learned to gain political momentum or start a political movement? I said, no. He said, Ron Paul. And I said, what do you mean? I said, Nigel, you led Brexit, for Christ's sake. What do you mean? Like Ron Paul, like you're the guy who pulled it off. He says, yeah, but Ron Paul taught me something. He said, you could take ideological positions. You could take your core beliefs. And if you can figure out a way to connect them with everyday folks and show that the system is working against them, and the way to fix it is to fight back and to dismantle the system, you can win. And normal people can understand that message. And that always stuck with me. So I think these culture war battles, there's plenty of liberty takes to be had. There's plenty of ways you can message liberty on a lot of these key issues, because it is the institution pushing some of the woke nonsense. And we're for, minimizing the institution as much as possible. I think that's the test for libertarians. It's the test for people who believe in liberty. But I think it's an opening. It's an opportunity. It's not a challenge.
I became a small business owner, and I had 2 little kids, and the federal government wanted their payroll tax, and the state government wanted their sales tax, and the local government wanted their property tax, and there was very little left over to feed my kids. And, it was frustrating. So I started looking into all the pork spending that the government was doing, and I thought it was ridiculous why, all these pet projects should be funded when I could barely feed my kids. And that, plus it was right around the time of post 9/11 where, we go in shock and awe into Iraq. And I didn't want to be funding these immoral wars where innocent people were dying in the Middle East, Muslims, Christians, it didn't matter. There were people dying by the hundreds of thousands, and I was funding it. And so it wasn't just, Democrat or Republican, it was both of them. It was the duopoly that seemed to be funding these efforts. And I just couldn't get behind it anymore. I am conservative in my social views, but some of the things that even the Republican Party wants to fund, I believe is immoral.
First of all, culture wars have always been a big thing. They seem like they're maybe bigger in the Trump era than they were, but I remember pre-Trump, like conservatives getting mad that Obama bowed at some Saudi prince, such stupid crap that doesn't have anything to do with anything. And that's the bulk of the culture wars. But at the same time, a lot of this stuff matters. You know, I'm not a parent, but if I was, and my son thought he was a girl because somebody at school or on TV said that, like, and I'm not trying to pick a side, like I'd be concerned. You know, I'm not trying to be Mr. Culture Warrior. I'm like, what the hell's going on with my kid? Is this healthy or not healthy? Stuff like that. So you do have to be discerning. But a lot of it is people just wanting to get mad about something. And part of what I loved about Ron Paul running, because, you know, my background's in talk radio. I used to do a lot of that. That's what that is. That's what that format is. Just getting mad about stuff that probably doesn't even affect most of the people listening or the person talking about it. And Ron Paul's like, we got to talk about the Federal Reserve. We got to talk about this war. Let's quit talking. This is not how he talks, but basically saying that's a waste of time. That's why so many young people who are like, they didn't want to hear their dad or granddad or mom's like, you know, Rush Limbaugh, Bill Clinton, saxophone. Like, who gives a damn? The Federal Reserve hurting us, you know, our money. Why are we in another war? Why, you know, are minorities targeted in the drug war? So that affects real people. And that goes back to your original question, what is liberty? Those are just different examples. As a libertarian, I want the victims of those things to have as much liberty as they possibly can by getting the government's grips off of them.
I mean, Pat Buchanan was kind of the old guard, old conservative movement. But yeah, after World War I, the conservatives were actually very anti-war. It's disappointing that hasn't become or hasn't been pervasive throughout my lifetime. But I am heartened by the fact that the America First, kind of make America great again mantra of the modern conservative movement seems to be re-embracing non-intervention, and I think that's a sign of real positive things. We'll see if it actually pans out. I don't know.
Yeah. So look, I don't think running for office is for everybody, but I think people need to pay close attention to those that represent you at the state level, local level as well. But to me, the state is kind of the, you know, you mentioned earlier the state versus the feds. That's going to be the battle in the future. And so my recommendation is to try to build locally, either run for state office or recruit a friend to run and help them. But really, or just holding your state representative and state senator accountable. It's very easy for these people to just hide out at state capitals and just kind of go along and get along and just win on name ID. And, you know, we need to be able to set examples at the state level. If we can't set an example at the state level, how do we expect the feds to have something to look forward, you know, to look at as a guiding light? And so that's always been my take. It's been what I spend all my time on. Right now, we've got a couple of states that we focus on, but we're trying to really build a liberty state. And I think that the real way that you can make a difference is, like I said, either learn what you need to do to win and run for state house, or get somebody involved or hold your state legislator accountable. It might seem like nothing, but I'm telling you that, you know, these state legislators, they have the ability to take your liberty away much more than a federal congressman.
Right.
It's, you know, it's day-to-day things within your state. It's the ability to tax you in a way that, you know, we all think is minimal, but it's incremental. It continues to go up. When's the last time you heard about a state abolishing their income tax? I mean, it's been years. I sat in a Republican meeting and they told me, they said, you know, well, we're trying to, instead of increasing the income tax by, you know, 0.5%, we're trying to do it only 0.25%. And I said, all right, so we're 5%. You want to go to 5.25 instead of 5.5? I said, why not go to 4.5? Right? And like alarm bells are going off. Like, what do you mean? You know, we reduce income. And it's like, those are the types of conversations we need adults in the room, not people that are working within the system that are trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep this thing churning? But it might sound like boring advice, but my advice is simple. Get involved at the state level, work the state level, and figure out how you can make it so that your representative is fighting for liberty. I think that is the best way to be effective and impactful at advancing the cause.
Like, you can't unlearn it. So it's, and there's one part in the book where they're trying, I forget exactly, but they're trying to get the Federal Reserve Act through. And one of the guys, he was in on it. He came out, I think he was a Republican at the time. He was a Republican. Those were like the big fat cat kind of big business guys.
Right.
and he really wanted the act passed, but he came out in opposition to it publicly because they knew like if his coming out in opposition to it would cause a certain amount of people to be for it. You know what I mean? So it was just kind of like pulling the strings.
Yep.
And ever since then, I was like, I wonder how much that's happening. You see a congressman or politician come out for or against something. How much is that like just like 4D chess, basically manipulating people's opinion to go in the opposite direction, and they're all they're all in on it. So
then
anyway,
they go in and vote. Then they go in and vote for it. Yeah.
It's that
in the minarchist camp. Like I said earlier, in the federal government, I think we need a strong defense. I think all our troops should be at home. I don't think we need to be policing the world, but we should have troops at the ready if we are attacked. On the local level, fire, police. I think that, there's room for limited government, but it's way over bloated. I think if
Way beyond
something
that.
is not protecting life, liberty, or property, then it shouldn't exist. I mean, to the point where I don't even think the DMV should exist. I shouldn't have to register my vehicle and tell the state that I own this vehicle and get an inspection sticker every year just so I can, drive my vehicle. There's just certain things that I don't agree with. I don't think the local government should be regulating me. Luckily in my county, it isn't like this, but I know in a lot of places it is where, the county governments exist to put regulations on homeowners where, if you have backyard chickens, even if you're allowed to have them, you can't sell your eggs at the end of your driveway without some sort of license, or, you can't let your kids, put up a lemonade stand.
If we push our political representatives to eliminate spending in order to stop taking our money, it would give all of us more economic freedom. That would also mean a great deal of personal responsibility. So with freedom comes responsibility. Many of the problems we have were created by government intervention. But what do we do as a society when there's a problem? We ask for more government intervention. Freedom means dealing with these issues as individuals, families, or communities, not turning to the government every time something happens.
So many libertarians that just want to retreat into the philosophy without actually doing anything to try to take the system that we currently have and devolve its power. So ideally, I think that the United States was set, and of course, there were a lot of debates about this when the United States was becoming a country, and there were different perspectives by various founding fathers. But I do think that across the board, the majority of political decision-making was always supposed to be delegated to the local level. And that's where you get the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution, that all of the powers that are not specifically enumerated to the federal government in the Constitution should be devolved either to the individual or to the state governments. And so whenever the state governments have an opportunity to appropriate more of that power to themselves and to make more of those decisions on a local level, I always think that that's a step in the right direction. And one of the great things about localization and decentralization is that it'd be almost impossible for somebody like me to have any sort of impact on anybody that goes to Washington, D.C. and makes policy.
Political effectiveness. And that usually occurs by getting together with other people and organizing to make demands. We are not even close to a democratic republic anymore. We have very little freedom, basically a neoconservative, imperialistic government. Both parties, the parties have become more and more identical over the years.
The antithesis of liberty, it's just by its very nature, it's going to be the use of force, use of coercion for usually political ends. I don't see any reason why government really should exist. That doesn't mean there's no authority or, anything like that.
Yes, and there's a silver lining to that sort of crude partisanship too. So going back to criminal justice reform, a dear family member of mine who's votes Republican but isn't super political, is not a weirdo like me, you, and probably a lot of people are going to watch this thing and think about all this stuff all the time. Right. Like Trump, and we were watching something on Fox about when he signed the First Step Act, which is the biggest piece of criminal justice reform legislation in modern history for sure.
One of the best things he did.
That's exactly right. I'm ready for a second or third step act. If he wins, we'll see what happens in November. And I'm not like
Right.
Mr. Trump, but this is
Yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about. That actually
Yeah.
leads to exactly what I'm talking about. Alice Johnson was on the TV when this was going on. Now, she wasn't a beneficiary of the First Step Act, but she was freed from prison by Donald Trump. So she sort of became the face of this. And for those who don't remember, Alice Johnson was a middle-aged black woman whose boyfriend was a drug dealer in the 90s or 80s or whenever the hell it was, and she was in the wrong place at the wrong time and spent many years in jail as a nonviolent offender. And I'm putting offender in quotations because I'm not even sure she did anything. And to the degree that she did, it probably should have been a fine or something, right? So he freed her. Of course, she loves Donald Trump because she got out of jail, but she was sort of the face of this. She became a reverend in prison, just a real salt of the earth, good person. And I'm sitting there watching this with this relative of mine, and they go, "Why in the hell was that woman ever in jail?" I said, "That's a good question. And just know there's lots of other people just like her who might have committed a crime. Some might not even done that, but they don't deserve the penalty they're getting. And Donald Trump just helped them, this person like Trump." And they're like, "I want to see more of that. It makes me feel proud that I voted for Trump." I don't care if it's partisan. I don't care if it's about Trump. That's how they feel. And it's an issue that wasn't in their mind even prior. Now it is. And there's a face to it in Alice Johnson. That's how you move people. That's how you get things done and policy change. Look, Trump himself was probably like, Kim Kardashian and Rand Paul told me this was a good idea. That's all I need to hear. And who cares? That's fine.
Right.
You know,
What,
look at me.
what gets us there? Right.
Who gives a damn? It doesn't matter. A lot of people care about that. Like, well, he's not doing it for honest reasons. Who cares? It was Murray Rothbard. Ron Paul used to say this all the time. It's like Murray Rothbard's like, you're not trying to make the entire Congress good people. You're trying to incentivize them to do good things.
Things about here is learning about all the different cultures, those that have moved here or have lived here their whole lives, but they've carried on their grandparents' cultural traditions. It's nice to go to a friend's house and they're say, "Hey, I got this amazing dish," or "Hey, look at this or that," or "This is something," they show me a book or, something that came from their background, their grandparents, maybe it's their own history. And it's interesting. That's what America is. We are a blended of multiple cultures. We're just now so far removed from 1776.
When one of my businesses, Brood Coffee Shop in Lexington, refused to shut down to the mandates here, and that became a pretty big local and national story. The health department came in and told me I had to shut down, and I was like, I literally can't afford to. And so I said no. Into the legislative side of things, because I had some people obviously come and talk to me. I had a lot of state house reps and other people come take pictures. And of course, the local Republican Party reached out to me too as well, was like, "Oh, you're great. We love what you're doing. We'd love to support you," everything else. And so I started going to some more local legislative events too, because I realized as I start digging into it, that what's happened to cause Beshear to be able to do what he's done is that because a lot of people are like, "Why is Beshear just able to do this?" Well, it's to do with the fewfold. One is that our legislature only comes into session for a few months out of the year, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But they only come in a few months out of the year. And normally our legislature, as our Constitution is wrote, are the only ones who have the ability to suspend laws, which makes sense. They're the ones who write laws. They can change laws. So they can suspend laws. Or they can delegate somebody to have that ability. And in the 1990s, the Kentucky legislature had passed 39A, which created the emergency powers of the governor, giving the governor here in Kentucky the ability to suspend laws passed by the legislature in the case of an emergency. But they never hemmed in how long an emergency could last, what dictates an emergency, deferring to these special interests. And it has to do with what pushes these politicians, most of them.
Yeah.
All they're worried about is being in office, getting elected to office, staying in office, getting elected to higher office. And whoever they think will do that for them, they will listen to. The thing is that the voters aren't doing it for them.
Most of the Austrian economists would kind of have that definition. But what I found is that was a redefining of what we always thought liberty was in the West. So liberty to the classics or the ancients in the West was always the ability to to master your vices.
That are either going to have hyperinflation. Either way, the US dollar is not going to be able to survive forever, because any fiat currency that's backed by nothing cannot go on indefinitely inflating until people look for other options. That will, I think, be a catastrophic blow to the world economy. But I hope that that will allow other nations to trade in their own currencies and get out from underneath the hegemony of the American empire. And I hope that that instructs a lot of Americans that we need to have more decentralized currencies that are actually backed by some physical aspect, whether that be gold, or I know Bitcoin's not a physical aspect, but it is backed like there is a foundation behind it. It's not just fiat or decreed money. There's a fixed amount of Bitcoin that can't be manipulated in the market. And I think that that's going to be the only way that we're ever going to be able to get back on track. And if you look at it historically, I mean, you have the French Empire, the British Empire, all of these empires have more or less done the same thing. They've had the prolonged boom, the massive bust, and then they've readjusted. So I just hope that whenever that happens for the United States, that we learn our lesson, that we don't ever allow the federal government to have control over our currency anymore, and that we can make more fiscally responsible decisions going down the road. It's going to be very painful. My biggest concern, and it will happen, like the bubble's too big, it's going to pop. Eventually the empire is going to collapse, and so will the dollar. I just hope that Americans learn the right lesson, which I think is why, and that's why I think it's why it's so important for us as libertarians to go out there and talk. I mean, these issues are very boring. They're not the sexy culture war issues that everyone wants to hear about, but I think it's so important for us as libertarians to go out there and explain all of these monetary issues to people, and obviously the issue of war as well, because we need to learn the right lesson when all of this collapses, which it will. But we could minimize the amount of pain that we have to experience if we already kind of understand what the problem is and can prepare ourselves to handle what happens next.
For a long time, that most local, most towns, cities are run pretty well because the people, live right there. Get to the state government. So in Kentucky, in Frankfort, they do not have the people's interests at heart.
In anything, if government was reduced to its proper size, it would be non-existent. They wouldn't have a role in any of these things, but unfortunately they do. And it's their hands all over it, and they're kind of, it's like they're pretending or pandering for political gain. So inherently, as politics is, it's dishonesty, it's lying, it's denying objective reality.
Of it is they're correct that civil rights laws are largely unconstitutional. It violates your rights of association, the fact businesses are your properties. I mean, you go through it, a lot of these civil rights laws are I think pretty clearly constitutional violations. You may not like what people do with their freedom, but that's what freedom is. But why did they have to pass civil rights laws? Well, because the original constitutional overreach was Jim Crow laws, because the free market was already desegregating, was already working towards that. And then a bunch of racist white people come in and say, I'm going to grab control of the power of government and pass Jim Crow laws to violate these businesses' constitutional rights to be able to associate with who they want to and manufacture this culture of racism. But if we just take away Jim Crow laws, well, the government's now manufactured to whites and blacks. The market incentive is to stay still, is to not do anything, right?
Because of social media and, even like commercial work, you've got all these attack ads. And I'm going to be honest, 75% of them are just lies on both sides. I listen to what they say, like their actual courage of convictions and what they do with that. You can make me promises all day long, but then in the next 4 years, you don't show up or do anything to keep those promises. You were just doing it to get a vote. Are they going to represent me? Are they going for them, for their special interest? Are they actually going to go and represent the people that are voting for them.
Like, and I guess just for my background as a Christian, so I'm a very traditional Christian, and I've lived that way ever since I became a Christian when I was a teenager. I've always had very traditional values, and if someone was to look at my life from the outside, they would think that I was probably just a conservative Christian, because that's the way that I live, and I'm proud of that. But I came to the realization in high school as I was reading the Bible that faith has to be a choice. Like, you cannot push your faith on somebody else, which led me to the logical conclusion that I think is completely justifiable in the New Testament, that we as Christians don't have a right to force our values on other people that don't hold to our Christian beliefs. So obviously my lifestyle arises out of my Christian faith. If somebody else does not have my Christian faith, then I don't expect them to live out my values. Have for your business, have those rules, and your customers can decide whether or not they're comfortable patronizing you. And I think a lot of them can also just be solved by acknowledging that other people are going to have differences of opinion than you. And if you want them to change their behavior, then the burden is on you to go out and explain to them why your values are better than theirs are. Now, when it comes to the current set of culture wars, I think it is really interesting. And these culture wars have obviously been going on in the United States for a long time, but they really seem to pick up pace around the year 2010. I think they accelerated through the Obama administration. And I think that the Trump presidency, whatever you make of him and his administration, was definitely a major inflection point in terms of the culture wars in the United States. And it had never been so stark, I think, before at that point.
I think that the culture war is actually tremendously important, but it's indicative of underlying issues that most libertarians are privy to, but they're not connecting the dot. Like, they're not actually connecting the origin story for why these things exist. There's this very kind of laissez-faire libertarian perspective when it comes to the culture war, that we do not want the government intervening in the culture. And so therefore we should not be using the government to remedy what concerns us right now. I think that the issue is that the truth of the matter is that the culture war exists because of the government, that through the ESG and DEI framework, which are both federal programs, but also globalist government programs. You actually have the United Nations, which has propagated these ideas. ESG in particular came from the United Nations in 2005 through 2006. It was all essentially a plot by globalist governmentalities to try and use a corporate like a private public partnership to try and address climate change, of all things. That was the 1999 through 2000 framework that the UN was working on, and this was their brainchild, that they were going to essentially incentivize private money managers to remake the world to address carbon emissions. But with that came the entire kind of Marxist progressive agenda of focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is all basically the S part of the ESG phenomenon. So this is a major government infringement and interference in the free market. You have the largest money managers in human history that are functioning under parameters that have been set for them by global government entities. If you're a libertarian and you support that, I don't think you're paying attention. I think oftentimes people just they look at the increase in LGBTQ self-identification and they say, well, this is just a product of acceptance and it's as simple as that. It's really not. I mean, there is very high level powers that want this to be a dynamic that we're dealing with. And I reject all of that. I think that, yes, I'm not interested in interfering with someone if they, identify as being gay or whatever. Like, that's totally fine. But I think we also have to recognize and basically wrestle with the fact that the government is in fact pushing this narrative, and they are now doing so not just through Hollywood, not just through corporate America, but also through academia and through public schooling all the way from kindergarten up. I mean, this is a very pervasive issue. On top of that, you have the central banking factor, which has really destroyed the time preference of human beings, particularly in America, where we're all borrowing and spending and living for the now as opposed for tomorrow. I think that has deteriorated our culture tremendously. So while I am not really interested in using the government to go after these issues, I am very much interested in going after the government to stop creating these issues.
Yeah, I think if we scale back the government, as you say, and fix a lot of the economic issues, I think a lot of the culture wars just go away. They just
I
heal
agree.
on their own. It's
Yeah,
like
they would in time, but it's still like the problems that it's created are going to be with us for a while. I mean, I totally understand and respect and appreciate the libertarian perspective that we ought to be leaving people alone as best as possible. The problem is that what has happened to people and to an entire generation of kids is that they have had their minds like really manipulated and propagandized. And I like the consequences of that are going to be with us for a generation. And I think that's something that we just can't look away from. You don't have to then conclude that the government needs to be used to address these issues, but certainly I think it's important that we recognize that the government did create these issues.
So I'm not a party loyalist. I get in trouble. Republicans hate me because I hang around with libertarians. Libertarians hate me because I hang around with Republicans. I believe parties are vehicles, right? And I think you want to use whatever vehicle is at your disposal to advance your ideology. So, I'll give you an example that gets me in a lot of trouble with Republicans. I have spent more money. I have raised and spent more money on libertarians for state office than any other entity in the world, including the Libertarian Party. Okay, I spent about $200,000 across 5 races between 2018 and 2020. And I did it because they passed my test, which was they were principled and they were viable. Those are the 2 things I always look for, right? I don't care if you're running as a Democrat or an independent or as a Green or Constitution Party. If you're going to get up there and fight to cut taxes and respect personal liberty and defend personal freedom, I don't care, but you have to have a viable path. Out of all of those races I've spent money on for Libertarian Party candidates, we won one of them. That was in Wyoming for Marshall Burt. It was him versus a Democrat, no Republican file, but it was a red district. So it was this wide opening. And so we spent a bunch of money. We knocked a bunch of doors. We got him elected. So I'm the guy, and I'll say this, and every libertarian will say, oh, you're taking credit. I'm the guy who spent like $40,000 or $50,000 and elected in the last 50 years the only libertarian that actually ran as a libertarian from state office and above. And so I love when I get crap from people, now listen, have I elected over 300 Republicans that are Liberty Republicans with the same model at the state level? Yes. But I share that with you because I try to tell people I don't really care about party. I care about what is it that you believe and that you're going to fight for. And I want something that can scale. I'm a math teacher. I just like to look at the numbers. And the numbers show me that if somebody runs as a Liberty Republican, like a TJ Roberts, like a Felicia Rayburn, like a Savannah Maddox, like a Rand Paul, like Kentucky's got a lot of great examples, there's a path forward. Right. There's a path forward. If somebody shows me a different path, I've never endorsed the Democrat because you can't win a primary if you don't believe in a $25 minimum wage. Mm-hmm. There's no way to have our ideological beliefs and be within that party. And so to me, viability and principle matter. But when I look at the strategies, every race is different. But I'm here to tell you, 99.9% of the time, if you believe in the principles of liberty, the Republican Party offers a viable path to victory. And let me say one thing about victory. Rand Paul won in 2016. We had like 150 people out in Kentucky. It's the night that Trump won. And Rand wins. He wins, I think, by 12 or 13 points. And everybody in the room goes nuts. And I'm sitting there like, well, guys, we knew we were going to win. I didn't say this out loud, right? But I'm looking at all the activists. I'm like, well, we knew we were going to win. It doesn't matter. When you win, people get energized, even if you're supposed to win by 10 points. The opposite is also true. When you lose, people get burned out. They're tired. And when you're in a third party, this is why they struggle so much to build in America with our 2-party system, because nobody likes losers. Donors don't, activists don't, right. Voters don't want to vote for a loser. And so if it ever was to spark, not even just the Libertarian Party, but any third party, it would almost have to be a Brexit type moment where someone or something led enough people to believe that they could win and they gained momentum and they did win. Because I just think when you lose, it is detrimental to any cause. And I think a lot of activists undervalue how much it means to win. And winning is contagious. People love it. It brings energy. and it keeps people coming back.
I don't think government should be involved in education. I think if it's kind of hard to say, because I know that there are children whose parents cannot afford an education, and so we have this government option that's free to them. I think communities can form those community schools without government involvement. I guess it would be more community involvement than an actual top-down, federal Department of Education. I definitely think all children should be able to get an education, but it's not a human right in a sense that that everyone has to pay for other people's children to get an education. And I don't mean that to sound insensitive, but I think there's enough of us that believe that if there are children who can't afford an education, we would see to it that children in our community would receive an education.
Voluntary association, right?
It depends on the person and their level of interest. And this is similar to what Ron Paul says when he's asked this question: do what you're good at, do what you enjoy, have fun. I have friends that were in this movement very deep and very active who aren't that anymore. Their beliefs are pretty much the same. They just have families and life's moved on, and that's okay. And I'll even see them. They're like, oh, I haven't been able to do anything in a while. I'm like, you're doing something way better than any of this political stuff. You have a family, and that's wonderful. The reason we should care about any of this political stuff is because we believe the way we think will be best for ourselves, our families, and you. That's the most important thing, is our affection for each other, right? And
Right.
When you start caring about the political stuff more, and I'm not talking to Dad anymore because he likes Trump, and he's not talking to me because I like Bernie or whatever, you got it ass backward. So that's the most important thing. As far as what people should do, I'm a bachelor, I'm a single guy, I can do more than most. I like to write and run my mouth, so I do. There's other people that have those talents that might want to do that. I'm very close friends with people in the movement who are good at organizing campaigns. Don't let me do that. It'd be all screwed up. That's not what I'm good at. Do what you're good at, have a good time. If your heart's in it, the more the better, and it's probably going to get broken a million times, but if you really care about it, it's all worth it. And just remember that it's not the end of the world. I remember Ron Paul 2012 and how they screwed him at the Republican convention. You just had people, I'm out completely, and they weren't. But I understand feeling that way. But
optimistic about the direction that our country is headed. A lot of that just has to do with the national debt. If we weren't in such a bad state financially, or it seemed like our politicians were genuinely willing to grapple with the debt and deficit and spending problems, I would feel a little bit more optimistic about the direct future of our country. But at this point, I do feel like we're going to have to fall off the fiscal cliff at some point in order for everything to be restored. And as I was saying, I just hope that we've been able to build enough of a philosophical foundation as liberty-oriented people that there's a softer landing when that crash occurs. In terms of what we need to do to advance the cause of liberty, I think that having more productive conversations like this is going to be ultimately beneficial. I think that reading and studying and being able to articulate to people why exactly the military-industrial complex and the banking-industrial complex is represented by the Federal Reserve are at the root of almost all of the problems in our society. I think that when people, it doesn't matter if you're left, right, whatever, unless you've just completely, and I really do believe that there are very few Americans that have just completely taken the blue pill and are unwilling to hear what other people have to say. I just feel like you have to be articulate in that, and you have to explain to average people how these things are actually working and screwing them over. And I think that that is going to be really beneficial in terms of spreading these ideas and helping people better understand liberty. I also feel that as libertarians, we should do our best to reach out to people that are not libertarians and have conversations with them. Like one of the things that I try to do on my podcast is, and half of my podcast is biblical studies and theology, and the other half is political philosophy and economics. And I try to talk about the relationship between those two. But I've had lots of Catholics on my show. I've had socialists, Marxists, people from all over the cultural and theological and political spectrum. And the reason why I do that is because I'm interested in these ideas, and I'm interested in having productive conversations. And if we as libertarians really believe that our ideas about liberty are better than all of the other ones, then we shouldn't be afraid to have conversations with good faith people on the other side. And we should actually be the ones, if we say we believe in free speech who are leading the push to have more of those conversations out in the open. And so respectful, thoughtful, intellectual dialogue with people that are different than us, I think will ultimately produce greater fruit in the future, that more people are going to be open and willing to hear these ideas if we can do it in a palatable way. And then I also believe that as libertarians, we have a responsibility to like live this out. If we really believe in freedom of association, if we really believe in freedom of speech, if we really believe in limited government, then we have to operate with those principles in the way that we live our moral lives. And we should essentially treat our neighbors and our friends and our family members and the people in our community in the way that we would want to be treated in a libertarian society. So it's up to us to just live that out and show other people that this philosophy of understanding human relationships in society and government and economics are superior. It is superior to all of the other ones.
In closing, how do you define liberty? How can you help everyone achieve more liberty? Is this political? Is it a social issue? We each have to look at ourselves to decide how much liberty we want and how do we achieve it.
A lot of the issues that I described, it's increasingly challenging to get away from the government. The DEI and ESG stuff that I talked about, like that has made it so that essentially you cannot work for a large corporation and continue to think or speak freely. That's a really bad dynamic because, well, I'll spin it positively. The silver lining in that is that if you want to be free, you're going to have to become an entrepreneur, or you're going to have to find a corporation that has somehow bucked the trend and not gone along with this insanity. But I think that if you really want to be free, you're going to have to go down an entrepreneurial path in the near term, just simply because any large corporation is going to be pushing this kind of woke DEI stuff on you. And as a consequence of that, you're essentially going to have to either bite your tongue or totally change your worldview to be able to succeed in that environment. I think that's sick. I think it's dangerous. I think it's not conducive for a cohesive society. And that's why we're seeing our society break down, unfortunately. But from my vantage point, the best thing you can do if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, if you're the type of person that likes to reap the rewards of your efforts, I think that taking an entrepreneurial path is definitely something I would recommend to any in your audience that are thinking about doing so, even if it's just a side hustle at first and it's something that you can start out on that's only making 5 or 10 or 20% of your income. The sooner you can get it to being the lion's share, the sooner you can free yourself from the corporate shackles that force you not to think freely. And I didn't used to feel this way because I don't think this used to be the dynamic. I think you used to be able to work a corporate job and you used to have ideas that would run afoul of the the HR department at your work, and they wouldn't really care because it's not really relevant to your job. But that's just not the world we live in anymore. If you tweet something, if you post on Facebook or Instagram something that runs afoul of the woke agenda, you will be fired. Like that's where we're at now. So as I said, silver lining, I think that is driving a lot more people that have my worldview into entrepreneurial endeavors. The entrepreneurial endeavors will ultimately create some of the best companies of the future. And because they're being founded by people that are doing so in revolt to the current paradigm, I think that's reason for true hope. But sorry, that was a major rant and tangent just about what I would do in terms of work wise, but that's such a huge part of being an adult and being a man and like what you're going to do with your life, that I think that for young men that have our worldview that are trying to start out, like that's the number one thing I try and incentivize or advise them to do, is just to really embrace that path. Like there is nothing more gratifying than working for yourself and reaping the rewards of your labor and succeeding or failing on your own merit. I think it's made me who I am, and I'm so grateful that I took those risks when I was young, and it enabled me to now pursue my passion project, which is once again becoming a career. And that's just kind of what I've done for 20 years now.
Yeah, I actually had kind of the same issue. I'm divorced, and my daughter's father insisted that she go to public school, and it wasn't a fight I was going to go through with him. And my daughter was in public high school, and she had a very different experience from my son, who I homeschooled in high school. Wow. And the difference was night and day. the woke mind virus is very real, and the hive mindset with some of the trans issues, and girls being led to believe that if they're a little bit of a tomboy, maybe they should be boys. And I had to go through that with my daughter in public school.
I think we need to pick our spots. It's not just all about politics. There are cultural things that go on. I still think one of the most cultural, one of the most libertarian movies of all time is Dallas Buyers Club. Have you ever seen that? Came out about
I have.
10 years ago, probably a little
Yep.
bit longer than that. But here's a guy, straight, gets AIDS because he's promiscuous. Wants everybody to know he's not gay. This is the era. It's in Texas, right? In the 80s.
Mhm.
And once he gets over that, realizes that there's medicine that can help them with AIDS, and the FDA won't let them have it. So the bad guy government is keeping medicine from gay people primarily with AIDS who don't want to die.
Right.
That's the bad side. The good side is this one cowboy redneck dude who has AIDS and is trying to do the right thing and smuggle it behind their backs and flipping them off and all that. You asked me what you could do. In that time, I'm like, go see that movie, dude. The government. Go see that. Go see E.T. again, because the government's scary and sucks in that movie too.
Yep.
As far as politics goes, I worked for Rand Paul. I worked for Ron Paul. I think Ron Paul's 2 presidential campaigns opened more minds to the ideas of liberty than anything else in my lifetime, for sure, and maybe ever, maybe since the American Revolution even. We capitalized on that as much as we could. I remember one of my speeches going down how many Ayn Rand books sold between 2008 and 2012 compared to prior or after, and it was like quadruple.
Wow.
People saw him, well, libertarian, what is that? Oh, Ayn Rand, she's that. And that was a thing. So there'll be other moments like that. We'll never see them coming. I'm kind of interested in what the Libertarian Party is doing right now. I voted for Gary Johnson twice. I voted for Joe Jorgensen in the last election. I don't know which way I'm voting this year. But I like the idea that the head of the LP would be like, let's invite Trump to our thing, and let's talk about commuting the sentence of Ross Ulbricht and putting libertarians in his cabinet. Well, I never thought of the Libertarian Party that way before. It was just a vote of conscience for people like me who didn't like the 2 mainstream candidates. But could it be a leverage tool in real life? I think Biden pardoning Assange, he didn't pardon Assange, but he said time served, will make Trump even more so say, well, damn it, I'm pardoning him. And here's Snowden and maybe Ross Ulbricht too, hopefully, God willing.
Right.
But don't think for one second, we don't know for sure, that the Libertarian Party and this thing being in the ether about the pardons and stuff wasn't a part of where we are right now with Assange at least being free. That's a pretty cool accomplishment.
We can do as individuals, citizens, community, however you want to put it, to achieve more liberty in our lifetimes.
Locally get involved, get on school boards, get on your local board of supervisors. If you can't run for office, attend your local meetings and make sure your voice is heard. Going up, state and federal government. We are the media now on X. I mean, our local and federal officials are on there listening to us. And so if the very least thing you can do is get on social media and make your voice heard to your elected officials, it works. We've made some policy decisions turn around and some bills get quashed because of our voices on social media. So, we just have to be loud and make sure that our
TikTokers who were either left-wing or just left-wing by default were all about Rand Paul, or shocked that they were about Rand Paul because he spoke out against the TikTok ban and why this is bad. And they're like, the government's going to ban, which will go into effect in January unless it's changed.
Right.
And it could be Trump is against the TikTok ban. We'll see what happens. But all of a sudden they're like, I can't believe that Rand Paul's my favorite guy ever. He wants to, we love TikTok. We're on TikTok, but he was going to protect it. He was doing it for free speech reasons,
Right. Yeah.
He told the Republicans, he's like, we already have a problem with youth. You want to be this stupid and take this away from them? Are you idiots?
Right.
But the point being, and what you just said, it was something they could relate to, and a libertarian Republican was doing the liberty thing to it. And whether they ever thought about libertarianism or any of that before, in that moment, they knew they loved TikTok. The government was trying to take away, except for this one hero who was speaking out against it. It could have the power to maybe make it go the other way. If there was a first step back and Trump became president again, why not a second and a third step back?
Right.
And Kim Kardashian and who other celebrities in with this come out and praise Trump and makes them want to do it more. Who cares? But a lot of that is like Mike Lee and Rand Paul are around him and in his ear. So those things are important. They're important at the local level. Things like what the Defend the Guard, which is fairly new to me, but that's awesome. Like, so there's so many things. And I meant what I said earlier, find what you enjoy, find what you're passionate about, and give it as much time as you can or want to. Nobody's forcing you to do this. That's part of being a libertarian. This is
Exactly. Right.
So, that's what I would say to that. And have fun. And yeah.
This is what libertarians are not good at, is creating art, generally speaking. So if you have the filmmaking capacity, as far as I'm concerned, that's artwork, and that's the type of thing that can break through to an audience that doesn't come from the wonky economic side that I came from. And I think if you can bridge that gap, it'll allow people to then consider other avenues for information. I think once they start listening to Liberty Lockdown, Part of the Problem, Tom Woods, whatever, once you see our track record in real time as you're listening to us, and you're like, all right, these guys are analyzing these things years in advance and they're getting everything right. Why is that happening?